Welcome to the Christian Mentor. My name is Joey Cavaretta. On this channel, it's my goal to teach you how to live biblically in a confused culture. One of the questions that comes up often when I'm talking to somebody about God is, why do you believe in God at all, let alone a loving God? With all the mass shootings and wars, starvation, child cancer, I just don't see God in all of that. How could you believe in him? But is this evidence against God's existence? Well, I actually believe it's evidence for God's existence, and I'm going to make that case to you now. Let's dig in. All right, let's bring some clarity to the discussion and define some terms. When somebody is talking about mass shootings and murder and rape and even child cancer, what they're describing is evil. Well, what exactly is evil? Let's define it. Many people believe that evil is the absence of good, but I'm going to challenge that definition. I think evil is actually a perversion of good. Think of rust on a car or rust on metal, right? You can remove all the rust from metal, but you can't remove all the metal from rust. Rust can't really exist without metal. It perverts the metal. And I think that's the same way with evil. There is no such thing as absolute pure evil. Even the most evil person has at least one good quality. Let's talk about Satan, for example. I think Satan has at least one good quality. That good quality would be free will. Now, he uses that free will and he perverts it by rebelling against God. But he has free will, and that free will is a good quality. So he's not pure evil. So you see that evil is actually a perversion of good, but not the absence of good. I think there's two types of evil out there. There's moral evil. This is the evil inflicted by man, right? This is rape and murder and mass shootings and wars and genocide, really abhorrent behavior that we all know is horrible and bad. Then there's natural evil. Natural evil is child cancer, tornadoes, hurricanes, tsunamis, right? Things inflicted by nature that cause pain and suffering and deaths. All right, so let's really clear up and define what it is exactly that the skeptic is saying. What is his actual argument against the existence for God? So what he's saying essentially is that if God is all-loving and all-powerful, if he's a loving God and an all-powerful God, then his love would want to protect us, to give us what's best for us. And in doing so, he would stop the evil that exists, right? That there would be no mass shootings, there would be no child cancer because he loves us. Why would he want us to go through that? And since we see every day that this stuff exists and that we have to deal with it and suffer through it, then either God is not all loving, meaning he doesn't care for us, or he's not all powerful, meaning that he can't stop it, or he just simply doesn't exist at all. And in reality, if God isn't all loving or he isn't all powerful, then that completely goes against the definition of the Christian God and would disprove the Christian God. So my question is, does this argument actually hold up? Does this disprove the existence of God? Or are there explanations for why God, that is loving and is all powerful, would allow these things to occur and allow us to have to endure and go through them? And that's what we're going to get into right now. I'm going to attempt to reconcile a loving and all-powerful God with the existence of evil in the world. All right, so we've determined that evil is a perversion of good. Well, if that's the case, then you actually need good to exist in order for evil to exist. In other words, you need an objective standard of good or an objective good outside of humanity for evil to exist. You see, we know what evil is because we know what good is. We're able to pick out when that pure good or that objective good that we know is perverted in some way. If we didn't have that standard of good, that objective standard of good, we wouldn't be able to pick out when it's been perverted. C.S. Lewis puts it this way: a man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. God is that straight line. Why? because the straight line must exist outside of ourselves. Otherwise, it's simply subjective opinion. What do I mean by that? Well, if there's one objective wrong, for example, mass shootings, and we agree that's objectively wrong, that wrong transcends culture, it transcends humanity, we all know it's wrong, it shouldn't happen, then there's objective morality. There's a moral law that we ought to follow. And we know this. We act this out in our normal lives without even realizing it. Anytime you tell somebody that they should or should not do something, that they ought or ought not do something, then we're essentially saying, without saying, there's a moral law. There's a code that we all ought to live by. You ought to love your neighbor. You ought not put pineapple on pizza. You know who you are. Stop it. All right, but if there's an objective moral law, then there must be an objective moral law giver, right? The law has to come from somewhere. And because it's a law that transcends humanity, it must come from outside of humanity. And since morality is only among persons and not among animals, then the moral lawgiver must be a person. So we have a moral person who exists outside of the natural world, who imparts this morality onto the natural world. This is God, and it's pretty hard to deny that. All right, so while I've made the case that evil is actually evidence for God, I haven't quite reconciled a loving God with the existence of evil. How do these two mix? How can they coexist? And to this, I'm going to turn to the Bible to start making my case. In 1 Corinthians 13:13, and I love the way the NLT version puts this, 3 things will last forever: faith, hope, and love. The greatest of these is love. 1 John 4:8 says, the one who does not love does not know God, for God is love. You see, love is the point of existence. Loving God and loving others is a why we exist. That's our purpose. I explained this in the last video I made called We Have Purpose. If you haven't seen it, go check it out where I go into that into more detail. But love is the greatest good. Love makes life worth living. Love conquers all. But love cannot exist without free agency. You see, free will gives us the ability to love because you can't force somebody to love you. You see, love is choosing to sacrifice one's own needs, desires, and person for the betterment of another. Love is a choice. It's not a feeling. And you need free will to make that choice. There's no way around it. But you see, if love is a choice, and love is one of the options that you can make, then there has to be other options that you can choose. Well, the other option is self-love, which is a perversion of love, which is evil. Now, I want to clarify that. I want to clear it up a little bit. When I say self-love, I don't mean the desire to take care of oneself. We should absolutely take care of ourselves. This is actually a moral good. To be a good steward of the bodies that God gave us, we should absolutely take care of ourselves. What I'm talking about is self-love, in that you are sacrificing the needs and desires and betterment of others to feed your own desires. That's a perversion of love, and that is evil. You see, self-love doesn't care about anybody else. Self-love has no room for God. Self-love rebels against God. And this is where moral evil enters the world. So the very first couple in existence, Adam and Eve, they were created by God and they were put in the Garden of Eden. And in that garden, they could eat anything in the garden, from whatever tree or plant that they wanted to. But God said, there's only one tree I do not want you to eat from. The tree in the middle of the garden, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. God told them if they ate of that tree, that they would die. Now you might be thinking, see, why would God put that tree there, right? He's setting us up to fail. But again, if he didn't put that tree there, there would be no choice. And without choice, there's no love. They're forced into doing what they would do. They would have to have a choice to make in order for love to exist and flourish. So what happens? Well, Eve allowed herself to be deceived by Satan, and Satan appealed to her self-love. He told her that surely she wouldn't die, calling God a liar, and that God really didn't want her to eat of the tree because if she did, then she would have knowledge of good and evil, and having knowledge of good and evil would make her like God. And so she ate of the tree, and she gave the fruit to Adam. Adam, being there the whole time and seeing this all going down, didn't stop it, and then he partook in it himself. Why did they partake of it? Because of self-love, because they wanted to be God. They essentially wanted to remove God from the throne of heaven and place themselves there. That's self-love. It causes you to rebel against God. It causes you to not care about those around you. You see, Paul, speaking about Adam and Eve's sin and what that has caused, says in Romans 5:12, "Therefore, just as through one man, Adam, sin entered the world, and death through sin, and so death spread to all men, because all have sinned." You see, when Adam and Eve ate of that fruit, God gave them immediate consequences. It was through their moral crime against God that death and pain and suffering and natural evil entered the world. All of creation is now corrupt and operating under the curse of sin. This is why we have evil, pain, and suffering in the world. It's the direct consequence of man's own self-love. Evil, pain, and suffering are the direct consequences of our own moral crimes and the moral crimes of those around us and of those in history. It started all the way back with Adam. Now, you might say, okay, I get it. Our sin caused all this to happen. But God is all-powerful. And if he truly loves us, couldn't he figure out a way to at least limit the amount of evil that exists, limit the amount of pain and suffering that exists, without removing free will and therefore love? Couldn't he figure that out? Well, I think God actually may have. At least it's possible biblically. And while I can't exactly prove it definitively, I think there is evidence for an idea called Molinism. So Molinism is this idea that with God's infinite knowledge and something called middle knowledge, which I will get to later, that before the creation, God was able to play out in his mind every possible world with all possible free will humans living in those worlds and every possible interaction in those worlds from free will humans. And he decided to create the reality that we live in now to meet his desired end. Well, if he is a loving God, then it's very possible that his desired end may be a reality that results in the most possible salvations, or those that accept Christ and go to heaven, with the least amount of pain, suffering, and evil. This does make sense logically anyways. So what evidence do I have in the Bible that points to this? Well, Jesus says in Matthew 11:21-24, "Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! For if the miracles had occurred in Tyre and Sidon, which occurred in you, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes." What exactly is Jesus saying there? Well, it seems that Jesus is claiming to have middle knowledge. He's claiming to have knowledge that would determine what free will creatures or humans would do in different scenarios. For example, if you were in King David's shoes and saw Goliath in the battlefield, would you actually offer to go fight Goliath, or would you hightail it back home after you gave your brothers the food? Right? Jesus is saying he knows what people would do in those scenarios. That's middle knowledge. And there's many other scriptures in the Bible that seem to claim or prove that God has this middle knowledge. Now, it doesn't prove Molinism outright, but it is evidence for it, at least making it possible. You see, in my opinion, Molinism does reconcile a number of things, from God's sovereignty with man's free will to the amount of pain, suffering, and evil that we see in the world. And if Molinism is true, we can comfortably say that while pain and suffering does exist, through God's grace, love, and mercy, He has limited it for us. All right, that's all I've got for you today. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please click that thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please consider giving this channel a subscribe and hit that notification bell so you can be notified whenever I upload new content. Thank you, love you all, and God bless. I'm glad you're still here. Something's been bothering me. And comment below if this has ever happened to you. So the other day, I'm just sitting on the couch relaxing, watching TV. And all of a sudden my wife yells at me. Are you even listening to me? Are you listening to me? And I thought, that's a weird way to start a conversation. Like, really weird. Does that ever happen to you?